This holiday season, I want to tell you a story of a woman transformed by ghosts of the past and how this haunting helped her come to appreciate and live in the present. For as long as I can remember, I have had an innate desire to achieve, not only to complete tasks, but to complete many tasks and well. Some of this was born from my parents' attitude, who, as my late Uncle Steve used to say, were always trying to fit 10 pounds of in a 5-pound bag. I was very fortunate as a young person to have many activities to engage with: violin, ballet, soccer, volleyball, guitar, modern dance, partner dancing, choirs and solos, and of course, theater. And I was deeply uncomfortable with stillness. The moments where I was alone and quiet felt like an absence of life, an absence of connection. I would write poems or songs in my journals instead of being still. And I learned to survive my lack of self-love through constant activity. Truly, I was too young and too practiced at this avoidance to even notice my lack of self-love. My overachieving nature led to breakdowns, of course, but that path seemed to be what society wanted of me. As I got more involved in activism, the responsibility to take action became even greater. How could I slow down with so many injustices tearing down the world? By my mid-20s, my lifestyle became so unsustainable that the momentum felt like an unstoppable force. That's when a ghost came knocking at my door and everything stopped. I woke up to a profound childhood trauma that I had suppressed in my memory. I discovered that I was a survivor of child abuse. I discovered that someone I had deeply loved and trusted had been my abuser. It felt like discovering that I was not who I thought I was. It felt like half of my soul was being ripped away by an invisible runaway train, never to return. And it had all already happened a long time ago. There was no way to stay on the overachieving track I was on. No way to maintain everyone's expectations of me, and no way to articulate what I was going through. For the first time in my life, all I craved was stillness. I wanted to step away from all my activities and communities to be quiet and alone. I desperately needed to focus on myself. Half a year later, I applied to a graduate theater program at a Buddhist-inspired university. Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, is where I learned how to enjoy being still. The program was by no means the safe retreat I dreamed it would be. And sometimes the ego challenges felt comparable to the ones faced by the 11th century scholar Naropa. I kept looking for answers and guidance from my teachers, ignoring the wisdom in myself, and trying to ignore that ghost. I felt too lost and too broken to trust my own instincts. I mostly steeped in my grief privately, believing no one could really understand. I was deep in what we call in Buddhism, the suffering of suffering. Part of my suffering was my resistance to the suffering. I grieved the fact that I had to go deeper into my suffering to heal. I remember clearly being at the bottom of that emotional well, stuck with my ghost. It was there I lost all arrogance and confidence too. Eventually, I accepted my ghost's presence. In witnessing her, I found her shape to look like mine as a little girl. I was haunted by the part of myself ripped away, by the part of my spirit that had died long ago. When I felt angry, which was often, I tried remembering the wisdom of the Buddha in saying, "The arrow in your heart rests in the hearts of many." The compassion and rage that emerged made me want to fight for justice for all children. I knew this was my path, but first I had to be still and listen to the lost part of myself. For a month, I sat by a cascade, a small cascade at a creek in Stillness every day. I watched the water flow easily by, constantly letting go of whatever it carried in the mountains and flowing towards new life in the eastern plains of Colorado. I watched some droplets of water explode out of the cascade into a high jump over the surface of the creek. At that moment, those droplets were suddenly separated with no idea where they were or when or how or on what they would land. I watched leaves and sticks get tangled in bunches between the stones, while other sticks and leaves sailed through the cascade without impediment. I watched the rain flood this buildup of debris, sending everything swiftly downstream. The answers I searched for were not in my teacher's words or in any sacred text. They were in the meaning behind and beyond the words, which I could only discover through embodied practice, through the wisdom of my body. I had to let go of the pressure of achieving healing, for it was no professional accomplishment to check off my list. In fact, there was no way to proceed on my path. Rather, I had to recede and go in to go out. In the depths of my heart, I found some basic human goodness worthy of nurturing. In my personal practice, I began meditating on the image of holding my childhood self in my arms, telling her how I loved her, that she was good enough and deserving of love. I promised to protect her always and never leave her alone again. The more I practiced this loving stillness, the more painful thought patterns of my mind were rerouted. I could feel the grooves left by my old ways of thinking and sometimes steer the wheels of my mind out of those grooves. Over the course of a few years in Colorado, I was guided by teachers and myself into pockets of sacred stillness that rewired my brain and heart forever. On one silent retreat up in the Rocky Mountains, I didn't speak for 2 days, and I found it to be the most unexpectedly liberating experience of my life. For once, there was no one to check in with, nothing to explain or propose. Each time I reached for the distraction of the other, there was only the moment. One day, I climbed up a high peak for a special solo practice. Following the instructions given to me, I placed 5 small stones in a circle around me, and I practiced standing, seated, and laying meditation. As I laid on a blanket, opening my body and consciousness to the simple truth of the misty sky that filled my entire vision, a single raindrop fell on the inner corner of my eye. It felt like a blessing for all the tears I had shed on my healing journey. Before my poetic capacities could spin more metaphors, I felt another tiny drop on my arm. I took a deep breath of the moment, of my body's presence with the open sky. I could have cried in gratitude or laughed in joy. Yet another tiny tap of water called my attention to the presence of my ankle. And so it went for a timeless amount of stillness. The slow, intermittent reminder of the raindrops brought me back to the present, to my presence again and again and again. I learned the sweetness of stillness, the gracious nature of presence, the sacred release from the grip of narrative, judgment, and productivity. It was enough to lay there in communion with the sky. I was enough in my stillness, just like the sky, the mountain, and the drops of water. So, while nothing can kill a ghost, I've learned we can befriend them and allow them to transform us. After several years of conscious healing work, which was my privilege to be able to focus on, my ghost has transformed into a lens of expertise. Now I can comprehend what being alive might mean for a survivor with no resources. Not only am I confident to speak to the very real traumatic impact of systemic oppression, I am more in tune with the boundaries and rhythms of my body and mind than ever before. The ways I approach relationships, teaching, facilitating, mentoring, and even creative writing have all transformed. I still fall back into old patterns from time to time, as we all do, but I know that I'm closer than I've ever been to the person that I want to be in the world. I have learned that there are times when we must be ready to leap into action with a moment's notice. And there are times to be still, to be silent, to sit in awe of the truth. It seems to me that great wisdom often begins with a healthy discernment of when to act and when to be still. When we know another living being is suffering, and we can alleviate that suffering without harming ourselves or others, it is time to act boldly and without hesitation. And when we see a ghost, when we see grief and deep loss etched into ourselves and others, it is time to be still and quiet. It is time to listen deeply to the messages in our minds and bodies and watch them pass us by like a leaf floating in a river or a cloud across the sky. I continue to meditate regularly. Yet for me, integrating this quality of stillness into my daily life is perhaps even more important. Stillness can be invoked when evaluating how to respond to another person instead of reacting. Stillness can be invoked when feeling intense emotions that push at our boundaries. Stillness can even be invoked while taking a walk, riding a bike, or doing the dishes, because the practice is about being in the stillness of the spirit while in communion with the body in the present. That's why yoga means yoke. We aim to yoke the body to the mind, to this moment. Stillness releases muscles and anxiety, chasing nothing and no one. Stillness is my gift to my soul, and a gift I share with others. Stillness is my total presence, both mindful of itself and aware of its surroundings. Stillness is my prayer, my practice, and my medicine. Stillness asks for nothing and yields everything. Stillness is when I can feel my place in the web of life and know that we are all enough. May we all find ourselves in this stillness. May it be so.